Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. As my listeners know, we have spent a lot of time talking about AI and how AI is impacting the education space, particularly student learning and teacher pedagogy. But in all the conversations that I've had with various experts, we haven't had the opportunity to talk about it from the student's perspective. And while tonight we're going to be talking to the experts in the field, educators who are using AI with students, we're also honored to have one of the student authors of the following book joining us. I'd love to introduce two of the three authors of the book, The Next Word, AI and Learners. We're joined by student Amy Wallace, who co-wrote this book with Dr. Nick Jackson and Matthew Easterman. They're joining us from Australia. So with that in mind, let's start with actually our student guest. Amy Wallace recently graduated high school. Congratulations, Amy. Amy is thinking about pursuing a career in medicine. But before she does that, she's talking with us tonight on the podcast. So, Amy, how did you get involved in this project? And why did you decide to co-author this book with Dr. Jackson?
I got involved in the AI world through school. Dr. Jackson's actually a teacher at my school, and he started this group called the Digital Leaders. And so I joined that. Began the same time that ChatGPT and AI in schools became a much bigger thing. And so we were doing some work around running workshops for teachers and parents and putting events on. Dr. Jackson and Matt had written an initial book, and then they decided they wanted to do a second one with student perspective. So I was essentially invited to co-author this with them. I just thought it was a really good opportunity to essentially give the real, authentic student perspective, because I feel like that is something that is missing from the conversations and definitely has been. I think it's getting better, but really being able to dig in and put it in a platform that a lot of people can reach, teachers, decision makers, and people involved in the space can get that more authentic voice and lived experience.
I love that. And I love that students are having the chance to talk about how AI is affecting them, since it is them being affected. Nick, why did you write this book with the student perspective in mind?
John, I've always had a deep concern with authentic student agency and how education tends to play in that field, but really doesn't do it properly, or very rarely does that properly. And that's not just about technology, that's in education more broadly. Too often, this is school, this is university, this is all levels and all sectors. We claim to do student agency, but we don't actually do it, or we do it where it's safe. When it comes to technology, I would argue it's the most unlevel playing field we've ever been offered. For instance, there will be young people who are far better on TikTok than you are. Likewise, there'll be somebody younger than you are who may be able to build a PC and you may not be able to do that. So when we talk about technology, it is a disruptor. It always has been a disruptor in its various forms in this unlevel playing field that is technology, and allowing them some insight into what teachers face as regards pedagogy and those kinds of things, allowing them to actually take control and seeing what influence they have on teachers. With AI coming along, to me, this is a perfect opportunity for us not to make the same mistakes. We're starting to make the same mistakes again that we did with social media, in that we're trying to do things to young people instead of with young people, on putting actual young people on a pedestal and listening to them and taking the advice from them of what the reality is of their situation. So I'm trying to champion that idea, and indeed Matt is as well. There's quite a number of us that are trying to put students at the forefront in this discussion, rather than boring old people like me.
Yeah, and that resonates with me because, Nick, we've also done many episodes on the show on student agency and voice and choice. If we're really going to put our money where our mouths are, that also needs to be the case when it comes to AI. So, who better to ask than the next generation? So, speaking about that, Amy, I mean, I know we're going to go into depth about AI and how youth feels about AI, but given what I'm saying about a lot of the fear that adults have about AI, how do young people feel about AI?
I think generally almost every young person, if not all, are now using AI in some capacity. I think young people naturally would take any new technology and run with it, whether that is something on social media or AI. I think we're natural learners in this space where we just figure out how to use it. I think our main concerns come in relation to our future and our careers, not having entered the workforce in the full time capacity. We don't really understand how it all works and what that kind of job will look like. And then I think AI just brings in another level of uncertainty there. And we're hearing that AI is going to take our jobs or it's going to be really hard to find work. I think that is probably the biggest concern for a lot of the students I've spoken with.
Have the elders you work with or the educational system that you came from been preparing you for the uncertainty of having a career in the age of AI?
Because nobody really knows how AI is going to transform a lot of jobs. And so I think the best way that we can be prepared now is to be constantly active in the AI world and keep up to date, learning the basic skills that go along with that. Things like critical thinking, things like problem solving, any transferable skills that will be able to, no matter what AI looks like in your career or workplace, I want to pursue medicine, but I don't know how AI is going to look in that space. Maybe it'll take over certain roles like diagnostic or treatment plans. Then maybe I have to adapt what I do to work around that and work with it. And I think being in a world where we are working with AI all the time now as students, we're learning that naturally. So, yeah, I think that's how we can prepare for it without getting stuck in specific AI platforms. It's changing too fast to get stuck like that.
Right. Now, I'm glad you mentioned navigating AI for creativity, whether in academics or in one's career.
I've experienced that it can enhance it, challenge it, or help produce a better output. That is a potential, but it can also enhance it in different ways.
How have you used AI to enhance your learning?
I was also school captain this year. A lot of the events I would try and plan, I would sit down with AI before I'd propose it and get it to challenge my thinking, basically play devil's advocate. Then I could find the problems within my thinking and then fix that, this little sparring partner to then ultimately produce a better output. Or I would put in an assignment I'd written and get it to suggest improvements or point out maybe something I hadn't done so well and then make those changes.
I love that. Hopefully, adults are listening to this and realizing that the fears we have for AI might not be justified because you're using it exactly as a professional would use it. So now, Nick, Amy said a lot there in terms of how she feels about AI, what she likes about it, what concerns or wondering she has about it, particularly when it comes to her future career in medicine. Nick, are Amy's thoughts consistent with the other students you interviewed for your book?
Some and some not. There are definitely some divergent views. The book contains interviews with students across the world, from the US, from Ethiopia, from Ukraine, from Australia, from UK. Really, we've got some global perspectives, but I wouldn't say that the global perspectives show us that any one place is different from another. What they do show us is that, as well as what Amy's talked about, employment, those kinds of perspectives, we've also got environmental concerns mixed in there. We've also got the creative aspects, but we've also got the critical thinking, the end of education, the end of writing, those kinds of things. We've also got some really interesting perspectives as regards education systems. One particular view that comes out, which you'd have to read the book to listen to, really exposes some serious flaws in a whole education system in the way that teachers are playing a game and students are playing a game. It's quite unbelievable to think this is happening, but it's exposing the values that sit behind the system. When Amy's talking about those things in the way she uses it, any educator will know that there are some students who are not doing what Amy's doing. They're doing the wrong thing, or they're sometimes doing the irresponsible thing. Then that exposes to me something wrong with an education system and something wrong with values, doesn't it? Because if a student is not valuing what they're learning, then they're going to go, I don't care. So now I have the option to not care at all, but still get the grade. So there's something wrong there with the whole system. If they're not valuing that education, ultimately we have to do something about that. And so this starts to disrupt this technology beyond belief. And it's starting to make us hold a mirror up to what we see as important in education, which perhaps are not important to the young people.
What do you think adults value that, whether it's the students you talked to or other research you looked at, doesn't seem to matter to them as much as it does to more established folks?
Well, I think if we're going to get right down to the nitty gritty, some of the assessment pieces we put in front of students, some of the things that we make them do, are not necessarily what they want to do or they value. Now, as adults with lived experience, as adults who have entered workplace and know you need certain things, or we believe that young people need certain things, there are certain things we all have to admit that young people do not need to carry on doing. And there are certain assessments we make them do which are just not necessary. We have to consult with young people to get a balance, to get them to understand that there are certain things they have to do, which are necessary, but there's certain things we have to be willing to give up in our education systems because they're just game playing. They're not necessary for all learners as well. What we consider as being compulsory, what we consider as being things that are measured, are just not necessary for some young people. We have to look at what is it that we're trying to provide for young people. Ultimately, what is it they have to learn? What are the core skills? How do we measure that? What assessments do we have to put them through? Do we really have to make students write 1,000 essays? Is writing actually something they continually have to do? Some people may argue yes, but how many presentations do we make students do and actually standing and delivering? Orally defending something. How many exams do we make them sit through? Is that really necessary? Consulting with young people to get us to that point where we can go, okay, we have an agreed way of working here, rather than us going, this is the way we're telling you you're going to work. This is the GPA you have to get, and this is how you get it, or this is the ATAR you have to get, and this is how you get it. And if you don't do that, then you don't get in.
How do you think AI is playing into assessment? Do you think AI will change the way we assess students in a way that is more natural to them or not?
I think it has to. I think it already is. I think where it's not is where the system's burying its head in the sand or it's taking too long to change. So at the moment, you've got this sort of situation where some elements are changing, but when it comes to university entrance or college degrees in America or even professional qualifications, we've still got this sort of they're doing this, but we think they're doing that. So we still got that situation going on, a whole grey area. But the quicker we fight that grey area, which comes from consultancy with students, the quicker we're going to get to this more authentic terms of assessment. But yes, there are definitely things going on, but it tends to be in middle school where arguably it doesn't count towards anything, or it tends to be happening in qualifications where people are choosing to change. But when you get to colleges and universities, that kind of level, those things take a long time to change. But there are efforts going on, but I would argue it's too slow.
Indeed. And now, Amy, going back to you in terms of what Nick was saying about our educational systems not really valuing what should be assessed and not really engaging students in the process of determining what should be assessed or how to assess. Has that been your experience in your schooling, Amy? How has your schooling involved you in planning for how you want to be assessed, or hasn't it?
I think since ChatGPT and this became a big thing, I was already in like my senior year. So when it does count to my final
Right.
schooling results and all that. And because at that point I had the freedom to choose some of my subjects. So then they're things that I've decided to study, they're things that I value more. I think that gives me a bit of a different perspective to maybe someone younger or not in that environment. I've been in situations where if I'm writing my third essay for an analysis of something, what am I still gaining from that? It makes me question that. I've been in environments where I would submit an essay. I've also been in situations where I've been put into a lockdown browser and had to write an essay so that we can't use AI. Those are efforts to work with this technology, acknowledging that something needs to change. I don't think it's the right way because I don't like being put into a lockdown browser. Maybe I wanted to use AI to ideate or help me structure what I want to say or write down my thoughts and help it explain those to me. And I think then that's going from that angle of banning it in certain environments, which again, I don't know if it's the right approach, but I do see that's being acknowledged. I think we are slowly making efforts to change something in that area, but students will just find ways around it. Like in the lockdown browser, I knew people gone on to ChatGPT earlier and basically printed out some notes that they wanted to have in their browser and had those next to them and written those down. So students are always going to find ways around if you come from that banning angle. I definitely agree something has to shift. Some people I've heard are doing more conversation style assessments where they'll have a conversation with their teacher and basically asked about the content. So then it's more like authentic is what they claim. I think another thing I'm seeing a lot of on social media especially is people in uni being accused of using AI and having to go through all these processes to prove that they haven't. And I just see a fundamental issue there because why can't they use AI in some capacity? I think it all depends on the context and how it's being used. And there's definitely ways and situations in which people do plagiarize, but I just don't think those blanket systems are going to work anymore.
I hear you. In fact, for our listeners, before we recorded, Amy and I were talking about, even in the case of hallucinations, because that tends to be an argument that a lot of adults make in terms of students using AI, because AI hallucinates. But per Amy's point earlier, what if that then becomes a creative partner where students are talking about those hallucinations or correcting those hallucinations? And not barring students from using it, but thinking more critically and assessing what they are creating using it. So I'm glad that you talked, Amy, about the downfall of limiting in, say, lockdown browsers and limiting students using lockdown browsers or asking students to write 3 different essays and then using AI to prove they didn't cheat. Seems like a not only a misuse, but an underuse of the potential of AI. Just using the example that you gave as school captain, being able to use it as that creative partner. So, Nick, Amy talked a lot about some really good some of her thoughts when it comes to how her schools have used AI for better and for worse. Are you finding that Amy's reflections are similar to the research that you've done across nations in terms of how education systems are using AI, or are some better than others when it comes to allowing students to use AI fully?
I think, John, the most important thing that Amy's really unearthing there is the need to think deeply about assessment practices. If we're going to talk about assessment, it's not a quick fix. This is not a simple fix. This is not binary. This is not about turn it off, turn it on, ban it, don't ban it. It's good, it's bad. What we have to do is be open to working in the grey area. And that makes us uncomfortable as educators. So when you're asking us this book and the research around this book and all the people you talk about around the world, both students and educators, and the things we talk about is really exposing the deep thought that goes into this. This book is not going to give you answers. That's not what it's there for. The only thing it's going to give you is trains of thought, angles to come at this with, areas that you need to go on a journey of self-discovery as an educator, and every educator needs to go on that. Because if you don't start questioning everything about the systems we have and the way we work and the way we've been trained and what we accept as being that was the truth, this is the practice, this is not the practice. AI just blows all of that up in the air. So unless you're willing to unpick that at every point and get into some deep philosophical and some deep soul searching discussions and ultimately come up with decisions again with students in the mix, then you're just burying your head in the sand. Even if you think you're doing the right thing, there may be steps along the way to address some of the things that people are facing. If you're in a faculty in a particular institution where you're facing extensive plagiarism because of the work that you're doing, then you may seek a quick fix in the short term, but in the long term, that's not going to be the way forward. It needs a lot of work through, but the pressure is that AI is constantly improving all the time and students' use is getting more in-depth, comprehensive and extensive. So we've got all these competing things, but the worst thing you can do is do nothing. And there is, I'm sorry to tell you, John, around the world, there's still a lot of people doing nothing.
When I presented to my colleagues, some are very excited about the potential and others not so much. It could be revolutionary in terms of how it actually helps us to teach and students to learn better. So, to your point, I'm not surprised, Nick, where we move from here, especially with AI, because AI is that game changer. Whether we want to admit it or not, it is going to upend not just the education system, but so many of our systems in society. I guess my next question for you, Nick, is if a school wants to take their educators and students on this journey, what are some of the questions they should be asking of all their stakeholders, teachers, students, and even family? And how can they take that journey? Is it focus groups? Is it surveys? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, if you're looking at the methodology behind it, the way to do it, I think it needs clearly an investment of time. I think it needs to get people in a room, and that would be a think tank. I would also say that you could try and bring research into that, although trying to bring peer-reviewed research into that is very difficult because there isn't much. But there is some research starting to come out. You could also bring commentary pieces into that. And having that discussion groups, but being willing to challenge every aspect of your school or institution. So it's about allocating time. It's about bringing key stakeholders into that mix, which I'm glad you mentioned parents into that. You'd want to bring parents into that. You'd want to bring leaders in the school into that. And you'd want to bring students into that as well. But what you've got to do, John, is give equal footing. You've got to be willing to stand back and let the students shine. You can't let the students just sit on the side and not let them have a voice. You can't do that. This is completely different. So it requires an investment in time, which ultimately is an investment in money. Yes, it does require that. I would say the think tank is a good way forward, discussion groups, but a discussion groups that have got to lead to action and that it's got to have promises around it that you are going to drive things forward and make changes. So making your whole community aware of what's going on. This is not just a think tank for the sake of it. This is a think tank that's actually going to produce actionable items from it. I do think that would be a progressive way forward within an institution. I think if you are going to work within one institution or within one school, the one thing I would say is you should start with your own values. What do you value in your school? What is the most important thing about your school? What are you trying to aim for? What do you hold most precious about your school? That's the place to come from. Unless you can answer those questions and everybody's aligned with that, then any work you do with AI is ultimately going to be scuppered because you haven't aligned.
Again, not on those sidelines, but really being front and center in those think tanks. Was that your experience in high school, Amy? Did your school leaders invite you and other students to talk about what your AI policy was going to be?
I think there has been, yeah, a lot of discussions that have been very student centered. We have been able to have our voices valued, and I think that's quite rare at the moment in school settings. And that has to fundamentally change. You naturally know which teachers or which staff are going to be receptive to that or not. In some classrooms, I was able to stand up and speak about what I saw and give a voice in this space, and in other ones, That was very different when the teacher was still questioning whether AI should or shouldn't be used in a classroom and wouldn't acknowledge that it already was and they needed to move on. The way students will portray their AI use or speak about it changes based on who they're speaking with. But yeah, I think definitely on a broader scale, I was really lucky to be in an environment where my voice and other students' voices were valued.
And how did your administration help to surface student voices?
I think back to what I was saying when I got involved in the book, I was part of the digital leaders. It was this group where we would work on this, and that was students from a whole range of year levels, so from year 7 to year 12. We'd each bring our different perspectives and be able to talk about it, come up with whatever we thought we needed at the time, whether that was staff PD sessions where I would talk about how I was using AI, things I had learned from my experience and playing around with different tools and being able to show them what students were doing, because I think that's something that's lacking a bit. So for teachers to see or hear how some people are actually using it, I think is really important. I also helped co-design with Dr. Jackson and some other digital leaders an AI course for our students to do when ChatGPT initially came out. So those environments where we can actually work with the stakeholders within our school and be the ones talking to them, I think has been really important for that as well.
Yeah, I could definitely see why you were school leader. Not a surprise, Amy. So now, if I could turn to recent legislative events in Australia, how do students feel about this ban of social media?
My take on it is that if I was affected by it when I was younger, I would have hated it at the time. I definitely see the reasoning behind it and the benefits they think that it'll have. But the reality at the moment, it's been in place for just over a week, is that it's not effective. I don't know a single person under 16 that hasn't been able to find a way around it. They'll be on Snapchat and use the AI scanners and it will say that they're 20 when they're 12 and then they're past it. I think there's different ways to go around it. If the ban is effective for some people and some people are not on social media while others their age still are, it'll create a bit of a social hierarchy based on access. And I think that can be really damaging as well. Personally, I feel like it's about learning how you respond to social media. There were times where I would delete TikTok for 2 years at a time because I found that I was spending too much time on it, comparing myself to things I'd see on there. I'd delete it, or I'd delete my social media apps during exam periods where I just needed a break from that kind of thing. I do see where they're coming from with this, but I don't think it's the right solution at the moment, and it's just
Hey,
ineffective.
if I can challenge you with a question, clearly, Amy, you are very self aware and very mature in terms of how you are using these technologies. What would you say, though, to adults, parents, administrators, teachers who would argue that? Because I'm sure people listening to our episode will say, Amy's unique, Amy is special. What do we do with the students who aren't voluntarily shutting off TikTok when they should be doing something else? Does the ban make sense for in general because many students are like that?
It isn't actually banning people, it's quite ineffective at the moment. I can't talk for everyone, but my experience growing up on social media, I think there were two major things that affected my perspective on it. The first was that my parents would set screen time limits on it, looking back. The second thing was I've always been busy. I've always played sports and music and done other things. Having hobbies or things to do outside of social media, I think drew me away from that a bit and maybe grounded me a bit more. But in saying that, I would see a baking video on TikTok and then go and try that out, whereas I wouldn't get that if there was a total ban. So I think that's somewhere where especially parents can encourage that kind of learning or understanding.
I love that. Now, Nick, Amy said a lot again there. What resonated with you with what Amy was saying?
John, I do not believe that prohibition works. I do not believe it will ever work. There's long histories with all sorts of different examples that prohibition doesn't work. It's not effective. It's a waste of money. As Amy's explaining there, although we are just in the short term now, that's beginning to play out. Are we creating a more dangerous situation than what we had before? I understand there are deep-rooted fears. I've experienced them on a personal level. Some of the things that go on social media and how young people use them and the mistakes they make, the way the algorithms can affect young people and so on. But if we're going to create an alternative economy, we're creating a dark web, a little bit of resistance. There are young people who could easily spin up their own chatbot running off their own computer and invite all their friends and other people into that, where they're swapping pictures and doing what they're like, and there is no accountability and we don't even know that exists. That'd be one example. I read some statistics the other day where apparently Chinese VPNs had seen a massive spike in their uptake in the last 6 months. I wonder who's buying them. If we've got VPNs going on, I'd imagine there's some data sharing going on there, because these will be free or cheap. So do we actually know what's happening with young people in their connections there? Are we forcing them into areas where we don't necessarily want them to be in? The third one is, we can talk about vulnerable young people in terms of social media makes some young people more vulnerable, but what about those vulnerable people who rely on social media because that is their way of having a friendship group, of having deep connections, because they struggle in other ways? We've got vulnerable people who this helps, and we're effectively going to have to exclude them from this. So again, we're back to this binary sort of mechanism with which to deal with something that's become a problem to us. And to me, the answer is always education. Yes, and there are still going to be some young people who use social media in an irresponsible way. But education is the key. A rounded education is the key. Prohibition doesn't work. Banning something doesn't work. In fact, it just sets us backwards and allows these pockets to happen, which I would argue is more dangerous than the social media itself.
And now bringing it back to AI, Amy and I were also talking about how AI can, and again, this is technology in general, can really serve as a support to neurodivergent students as well.
It also offers some risks in that field as well. So again, we're back to the same sort of concept. Is can offer real benefits for them, but also there's a risk with companionship. There's a risk of addiction, those kinds of things, more screen time. Yeah, we've got all that. But again, that comes back to education, safe practices, responsible practices, those kinds of things. So yeah, there's a lot in that work.
Yeah, and it also reinforces what you were talking about before, Nick, about the need to be engaging in dialogue with students about proper and effective use.
It's holding a mirror up to the connections that need to be enforced with young people in the schools that they go to and the parents that bring the kids to those schools. You need very strong connections. You need to be aligned as to what young people are being taught, giving guidance to parents at home. As a parent myself, it's a struggle sometimes to know what you should be doing and how you should be behaving and what the school thinks and what they're doing. AI offers us this chance to not only realign our values in an education sense, but realign our values in a community sense. And if we don't have that alignment, kids ultimately will find ways through the policies you set in school or the parenting at home or whatever channels they're going to find.
And as we're talking, it really shows the importance of involving student leaders like Amy in these discussions, because parents, administrators, teachers, even in our conversation, Amy mentioned some things that I was not aware of. How can parents or adults counsel their children wisely when they don't even know themselves what the technology can do? So that's just another argument for including student voices in the discussion around AI and social media policy.
What that does as well, John, is it exposes the reality that, can you tell me a government anywhere in the world that's investing in exactly what we've talked about there? We've got some governments who are telling you they've got compulsory AI programs, or every kid's going to have to do AI literacy, whatever that means. But how many people are doing exactly what we've talked about, investing money in that? When a government invests money, they should be putting a campaign around it. They should be turning around and saying, we're doing this. All parents need to be on board. We're diddle-a-day, national campaign, that kind of thing. And then you're bringing it together. And then parents will start to listen, or more parents will start to listen. It doesn't only have to come on a local level from institutions. To be effective, it needs to come on a national level. Singapore is probably the leader in this, how much they're involving student voice. I know some of the work that they're doing on a national level and with their teachers.
Now, on a more direct note, how did Amy get involved in this project?
That's an interesting one. I can't put my finger on that moment when I went, oh, Amy would be good at writing this. I think it was just suddenly like when we were looking for how do we not make this second book from an educator's perspective. The danger is if you're going to write about learners, it becomes a book of teachers writing about learners. But that's not a book about learners, is it? That's secondhand. We could interview students around the world, which we did, but it'd still be teachers picking out the bits that they want to hear from the students.
Exactly.
So we felt we had to go a step further. So I suppose in bouncing around those ideas, myself and Matt was suddenly like, how can we do this? And then working closely with Amy and being able to see her confidence and willingness to be able to step into arguably unknown territory in doing teacher PD and doing parent PD sessions with very little preparation, and seeing that she could deal with that and her willingness to respond to that kind of agency or that kind of risk made me think that she could deal with that in respect of this book, get past her own imposter syndrome, which it really is when you're writing anything. Having done a PhD myself, imposter syndrome goes through the roof when you're working in that field. When somebody asks you to write a book with them and you've never done that before and you're still a student, you're going to have imposter syndrome. I thought she could deal with that. I could feel her unease to begin with. I think she knew that I was not going to answer her questions for her. This simple message was, just, you'll be fine. And maybe it worked. Well, she published the book, so clearly it worked.
Amy, why did you decide to get involved in this project? Or were you voluntold?
I was asked, and it's not every day that you get asked to author a book. From that perspective, I was like, this is pretty cool. Having those experiences at staff PDs or conferences or whatever we do, I would see how people did actually respond quite well to students stepping into that space and seeing, again, like even with social media, with AI, teachers don't always understand how we're using it or why we're using it. Like even back to the social media, my parents don't understand the concept of sending a Snapchat to someone every day of like your face. But that's just how we communicate now. That's the environment we live in. And I have friends that I've kept purely because of that. Adults don't always understand that. So I think coming from that perspective, understanding maybe I did have something to add.
Why not? So now, Amy, what have we not talked about that you want the listeners to know?
I think my final message is with AI, stay open-minded. It's something that changes rapidly. Something I'm saying now could be different by this time tomorrow. Be willing to change your opinions and be open to other people's perspectives on it. And we have talked about this, but secondly, keep talking to young people about it. Listen to students, converse with them, because again, they're going to be offering things that maybe you haven't considered. Open dialogue is really important in an environment like this, where ultimately we're the people probably being affected the most at this point in time.
Indeed. And now, Nick, how about you? What have we not talked about that you want listeners to know?
Amy touched on what I would say is that it is about learning. We're learning about ourselves in this disruptive technology. I argue that this is the most disruptive technology or the most disruptive thing mankind's ever faced. You've got to be willing to learn with it. You've got to be open-minded, and you've got to be willing to look at yourself and give things away. Be willing to challenge yourself on what you think is important and what you think is not. And if you engage in those deep discussions, you quickly move away from binary responses. And the biggest mistakes I think we've made so far is, number one, banning the thing in education, which just set us back. Those places that did that, it set them back extensively. But the second thing is not willing to engage in deep philosophical discussions and looking at oneself and going, what is it that I value here? What is the most important thing? What should we be doing? But also looking forward as well, AI will be so prevalent in everybody's life that attempts to work without it are quite futile. But there may be areas where you don't want AI involved. So unless you understand that AI, as I say this to young people all the time, imagine a world where AI is better than you at everything. You can't start thinking about where you do not want to accept its use. You can't decide where the human in the loop should happen unless you consider that AI can still do that bit where the human is in the loop, but you don't want it to because it's not ethically responsible, or it shouldn't be, or whatever your values are. So if we look forward and we go, okay, AI is going to be better than us at everything, where do we not want it to make decisions? Where should a human be making a decision? Medical offers us some great insights into that. To me, that's really where I try and position myself in all my work. So people will know that I'm very much pro AI, but that's not to say that I don't question myself constantly about that.
And now, Nick, where can people find out more information about you and the work you do if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me on there. I'm Dr. Nick Jackson on there. I also have a website called Future Learning, which I run and do a bit of consultancy work out of. Tons of resources on there, tons of commentary pieces on there. So now for futurelearning.com, you can have a look at both of them. Get involved in the discussion if you're not already in it. It's very prevalent on LinkedIn, and happy to bat any sort of comments that people want to make and be challenged. That's what it's all about.
Love it. And now, Amy, where can people find more information about you as well?
Yeah, probably the same. LinkedIn, definitely not on it as much, but it does seem to be the place that things are happening. Yeah, on there.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for your time for this really insightful conversation. Amy, good luck in college, university, medical school, whatever you decide to do. I think any school would be lucky to have you. Nick, thank you as well for your insights. I hope that people listen and really start vesting students in the discussions, because again, that's the only way we're really going to figure this out collectively. So thank you both.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.